That's what Jane's family was doing, right? If her mother could have been queen, she would have forgotten about Jane completely.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's so true.
Jane had 2 younger sisters, Catherine and Mary. They were not as important. Jane was an irritation to her parents because she was always, I will pray for your soul because you're gambling. Like she just felt like she was sucking all the fun out of their lives, right? But then when she was useful,
she's the golden child
right?
now. Yeah.
So I think it's really, I mean, it's a true story, right? How parents often use their children and as their personal trophies. Hi everyone, my name is Suki and I'm an author, writer, and researcher, and I'd like to welcome you to the Sisters of Light podcast, which is a production of Lineage. This podcast explores the lives of women in Christian history and looks at their significance and relevance to our life today. This episode is on Lady Jane Grey, one of the most remarkable and courageous young women of the English Reformation. Joining me are 3 equally incredible women, Charlene Coutet, Aiko Ramdin, and Chingy Bloom. As we delve into the life of Jane Grey, I pray that you will be blessed by this journey. Okay, so Lady Jane Grey, she was, controversially, she was probably England's first queen regnant, though she was never crowned. And she was born into the English royal family. And her grandmother was Henry VIII's sister. And so she was the great-granddaughter of King Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. And she was born into wealth and affluence, but never with any idea of, occupying the throne. Her parents were Protestant in the loosest of terms, right? So they liked to gamble, they liked to go hunting. But Jane, from all accounts, Jane was really intense, really serious, really studious. And I think one of those people where things are black and white. And so growing up, she had one of the best Protestant tutors. She was incredibly intelligent and she was very close to, she grew up during, the latter part of Henry VIII's reign, but she also came of age during Edward VI's reign. She and Edward VI were about a year apart. They were born around the same time. They were cousins and they were very close to each other because they were, I think their generation was the first generation in England where young people were truly Protestant. Under Henry VIII, you were this quasi-Protestant, right? But Edward VI really made England Protestant. And so Jane comes of age during this era. And things get really hairy when Edward VI gets sick. He's 15 years old. He's not, he hasn't attained his majority. So there's kind of a caretaker government. And that's always messy. And now he's dying. And he realizes there's a lot that I can't control. He took the throne at 9. He didn't understand politics, didn't understand economics, didn't really understand much of anything, but one thing that he wanted was England to be Protestant. And he's dying now and he decides, no. Henry VIII, in his will, he kind of dictated the line of succession. He passed the Act of Succession in Parliament, where Edward was his direct heir, and then it was Mary, followed by Elizabeth, followed by Jane. Jane's mother should have been in the line of succession, but Henry skips his own niece, Frances, and he puts Jane there. So Edward decides, well, if my father can do it. And so he writes in his own hand what he names my device for the succession. And in it, he strikes both his sisters. Mary, well, the reason he strikes both his sisters is because he doesn't want Mary to take the throne because she's Catholic. She will return England to Catholicism. But he feels like he can't bypass one and give it to the other. So he strikes both his sisters. And he uses the argument, well, my father disowned them because they were illegitimate, right? Because Henry VIII, annulled both his marriages. And so he bypasses them and he gives the throne to Jane because he likes Jane. He calls her my entirely beloved cousin. And also he knows that he and Jane have the same spiritual values. They're very serious. I think this is my personal take on it. I think part of the reason was Elizabeth wasn't so serious. She was a little lukewarm. She was Protestant, but a little lukewarm, probably for their tastes. So he writes this and he dies, and his father comes and he's one of his closest counselors, the Duke of Northumberland, strategically gets Jane to marry his fourth son, Guildford Dudley. And they tell Jane, well, you've inherited the throne. Edward's dead. And Jane cries and she refuses the throne, and she makes such a spectacle that her mother has to come and literally reprimand her and tell her, just pull it together. You're the queen. And so she takes it because her parents kind of put it on her, and they go down from Sion House. They go down on the Thames down to the Tower. And when they get to the Tower, the story is she comes out and she's going to process into the Tower. And all the citizens of London had come to watch, and they were just silent. There was no God save the Queen. There was no, they were just silent and stone-faced. And they fired the guns of the Tower to proclaim Jane Queen. And it was like the entire city of London was just quiet. They didn't want to. She was a Tudor, but she wasn't the right Tudor. And then it began a tumultuous, she's called the 9-day queen because they proclaimed her queen 4 days after Edward died. But technically she's the 13-day queen because she became queen when Edward died. And that was tumultuous, and she was just this pawn. Finally, we know Mary musters her forces, raises her standard in Framlingham, and then she marches and comes down to London. By the time Mary marches into London, Jane has been designated Jaina non Regina. The same people that put her on the throne drop this document, this group of adult men drop this document, designate her Jaina non Regina, Jane not the queen. Her own father, who just forced her onto the throne, pulls down the canopy of state and reprimands her. And you know what she says, what she's reported to have said? Can I go home now? She was done. She was 15. And of course she couldn't go home. She was taken from the royal apartments in the Tower and put into prison because she was a traitor. Now, she was in the Tower for a year, and then her father united with Thomas Wyatt in his rebellion to try to put Elizabeth on the throne. And that it's at that point that Mary's like, right, they all have to die. Jane is too much of a lightning rod. And Jane is sentenced to die. Before she dies, Mary sends her personal confessor, John Feckenham. And Feckenham's like, right, time to come back to the church. And Jane is like, Jane is just like, that which you call God is but bread. Like, just cuts him down to size. And at the end of the interview, Feckenham says to her, well, I don't suppose I'll see you again. Meaning, you're going to the other place. And Jane turns around and says to him, no, I don't suppose I will. But when she goes, they take her down to the scaffold. It is remarkably detailed. She was one of the few women who was granted the privilege of being beheaded, if I can say that that's a privilege, on Tower Green. Everybody else was beheaded on Tower Hill. She was beheaded on Tower Green within the precincts of the Tower. And she takes off her robe and she just has her, her chemise underneath. And as she's mounting the platform, John Feckenham is there. And he comforts her. I thought it's really beautiful. She sings a psalm and she stands there and she shares her testimony, why she is a Protestant. And I think that was strategic because they knew, all the Protestants knew that under Mary, it was game over, right? By that time already, Latimer, Cranmer, and Ridley had been imprisoned and they were in the tower already by the time she died. She knew already people were dying, for being Protestant in England. And so she took this as an opportunity, like a last hurrah. Before the gospel is snuffed out in England, I'm going to stand and I'm going to use this platform, this unlikely platform of a scaffold, and share the gospel. She shares the gospel. They blindfold her. There's a great painting at the National Gallery in London, Paul de la Roche, and she can't find the block. And they put her hands on the block, and she tells the executioner, dispatch me quickly. And she's gone. She's 16 years old. And I think her story is just poignant and brave. And kind of, it's a bit disjointed, because you're tempted to ask yourself, if she hadn't been put on the throne, would Mary have ever imprisoned her? Would she have ever been a threat? Would she have ever been beheaded? I think yes, only because she was such a strong Protestant. And when you look at what Mary did to others like her, it was only a matter of time. I feel like she was just dispatched quicker than the rest. So, yeah. I think Jane's story is mostly about courage in the face of persecution, the courage to be different, to swim upstream when the current is against you.
Something that kind of stands out to me is just how controlling her parents and in-laws were. Like, poor thing, forcing her into marriage. And then the way she came to the throne was just because they were so power hungry themselves.
That's right.
They're like, her parents and in-laws were just selfish and self-seeking.
Yes.
And she was the one who had to suffer for that.
Right.
She didn't have, I don't feel like, her parents weren't looking out for her best interests in either of those situations.
No, they were living vicariously through her. And I think that's a really interesting thing to talk about. How sometimes as parents, we use our children as trophies of personal achievement, right? That's what Jane's family was doing, right? If her mother could have been queen, she would have forgotten about Jane completely.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's so true.
Jane had two younger sisters, Catherine and Mary. They were not as important. Jane was an irritation to her parents because she was always, I will pray for your soul because you're gambling. Like she just felt like she was sucking all the fun out of their lives, right? But then when she was useful,
she's the golden child
right?
now. Yeah.
So I think it's really, it's a true story, right? How parents often use their children and as their personal trophies.
To live out their unfulfilled dreams through them.
Right.
Rather than actually allowing their child to fulfill the purpose that God has created them for, you know? Yeah, and I find that that's something that I've really been passionate about with my kids. Like I want to see their heart, not just the things that they might be good at or, things that they might be swaying towards. I really want to read what their hearts are about. And if they'd actually taken the time to read her heart, she wasn't interested in power like they were. She wanted to serve God and just do her thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important that we can rob our children of a very bright future and the joy out of life if we prescribe to them how they should be.
I was recently reading this book by George Barna called Raising Spiritual Champions. And I came upon it fairly randomly. I was doing some other research. And in the book, he talks about, so spiritual formation for children based on research, right? So this is all statistically accurate. And he talks about how 94% of adults in America that are Christian, that call themselves Christian, made a decision to be Christian between the ages of 8 and 12. So he says 8 and 12 is where you're really choosing to instill spirituality in your child. And then he says this, that, how do you measure spirituality? And he gives 5 competencies. The first 3 are fairly generic. You accept that Jesus saves you. You accept that the Bible is the source of all absolute truth. and you believe in, you believe in the surety of you believe in the Bible, you believe that God is the source of all absolute truth, and you believe in the gospel. The last two are the most interesting. He says, number 4, how do you measure success? Measuring success is the measure of success in life is obedience to God. And number 5 is the purpose of life is to know, love, and serve God. And he says a lot of parents and kids, they'll score high on the first 3. Of course, you're going to teach your child that Jesus died for you. And okay, not everybody wants their child to believe that the Bible is absolute truth, or, there's variations there, even among Christians. But it's the last 2. It's that one of, but I want my child to be good at sport, or they're doing all of this. Like, what? The only measurement for success is obedience to God? And I think, so I read that and I was like, Lord, I want that for my kids.
It's quite interesting. So I obviously came from that's not obvious, but I came from a non-Christian background. But now I'm in church. A lot of my friends homeschool versus a lot of my previous non-Adventist but Christian friends, they send their child to school. But when you look at the whole system of school, it's to teach children to be obedient to, I guess, their teachers or whoever it may be. But you're talking about obedience to God. And I guess I don't know if it's a debate, but should you homeschool, should you not? So, of course, Auntie Ellen, G. White, would say yes. And I think before, when I first came to the church, I was like, no way, why on earth would I do that? Like, that's crazy. I'm going to work. My child's going to go to nursery. But now as I've matured a bit in Christ, I'm like, actually, there are so many pros of having your child homeschooled or being brought up, within your own community or within, I just guess, yourself, right? And I'm just now thinking out loud.
That's okay. That's what this is. And I think, homeschooling is one of those cans of worms, right? Because there's a lot of people in the Christian world that are for or against. I homeschool my kids, but I have a lot of friends that don't. Let's wrap up this segment. Wow, that went quickly. But let's wrap up this segment. I want to come back. Let's touch on homeschooling, but also the principles that undergird that decision. Why would you choose that? What are the principles involved in how you educate your children, how you invest in your children? And I'd really like to dig deeper into, those last 2 competencies a little bit.
Lineage Journey not only produces video content, but instructive and illuminating resources to teach young and old about Christian history. Lineage has produced an educational coloring book for people of all ages. It includes original artwork from Ashley Bloom, highlighting the various heroes of the Reformation. Each scene has a matching story, and there are also QR codes to connect you to the website for more information and to watch the videos. There are also fun facts and memorable quotes to accompany the scenes to color in. Designed for young and old alike, get your copy now at lineagejourney.com.
The greatest story ever told began with a war in heaven, reached its climax at the cross, and finds its culmination through the historical narrative of the Church. If there was only one book you could read to understand the epic struggle between Christ and Satan, it should be this one. The illustrated Great Controversy takes you on an unforgettable journey through the tragedies and triumphs of the Church, drawing you inexorably onward to the great finale of this earth's history, Jesus returning for those he loves. The book features QR codes directly linked to short videos, summarizing each chapter, along with discussion questions which can be used to facilitate personal reflection or small group discussion. Our website also features chapter summaries and historical articles linked to the book, which are designed to enhance your reading experience. Don't wait. Go ahead and grab your copy today from lineagejourney.com/shop.
All right. So we left off the previous segment looking at Jane Grey's parents and this idea of how they were using her as a pawn to achieve their own goals, right? To advance themselves. And we were looking at this idea of how sometimes as parents we can use our children as little trophies of achievement for ourselves. And then that segued into how we raise our kids, what values. We also touched a little bit on homeschooling. How I want to open this segment is let's look at, so we looked at, when we just touched on the idea of homeschooling, but I mean, I think sometimes it's why, the sentiment behind, right? Why you might want to homeschool or not homeschool, but I want to look at, as parents, what our focus needs to be.
I want to say something because I feel like actually it goes along with Jane Grey's parents.
Yes.
And the whole situation.
Yes.
And homeschooling, some parents, their why is because they want more control.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
Oh,
Let's get
gosh.
into that. Yes.
yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Like, I want to control everything my child reads and sees and
right.
is exposed to.
Right.
And there is some degree of wisdom in that
Yes.
at certain ages and stages. But there's also, that can be really unhealthy and damaging for children.
100%.
So we don't want to be like holy Mr. and Mrs. Grace and controlling everything about our children.
Yes.
Yeah.
Kind of removing some of their agency.
Yes.
And then as a result, maybe we're trying to unconsciously make them into trophies
Right.
of our, they
Right.
will be, and hope
Right.
that they'll become beautiful spiritual people by controlling
Right.
them.
Because there is such a thing as spiritual pride,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah.
So there is such a thing as, okay, I'm not out in the world chasing after those achievements. But then there's the other ditch, which is I'm going to use the means that I have available to me here in the church to produce this perfect little family so that everybody will think that I'm so spiritual. Ultimately, the human heart is about pride. And if we cannot if we cannot exalt ourselves using the means at our disposal in the world, there's still ways that we find, like the Pharisees, to exalt ourselves in the church. And we don't want to fall into either ditch,
Yeah.
right? So I'm thinking, let's stay away from the topic of homeschooling or not. That's a personal choice, right? That's up to every family. But I think one thing that we can talk about is that when we raise our kids, what must our focus be,
Yeah.
right? And I really like what Aiko shared, that word agency, right? Because often when children are very small, of course, the boundaries are smaller, right? Just because you just don't want them to kill themselves, right? So you say no a lot more. I mean, a lot of it is health and safety, but then there's also behavior.
Yeah.
But as they get older, as Christian parents, we like to control, and sometimes if we're Christian parents, we're in a community, we're like, oh, what will everybody else think if my child is like this? Or we want to force compliance. But I was reading, and I don't remember the exact wording, but I was reading the book Child Guidance, this idea that, we must train our young people and our youth not to be, and this is my word, automatons, but we need to train them to think,
Yeah.
right? So that they are able to make decisions for themselves. Because otherwise, something that I've seen happen is that you control them and they allow themselves to be controlled because they have no choice. And then when they
because of using fear and other
control, like this is
tactics.
All that, right? And then they get to that age of 18, 19, and they just, once they have autonomy from their parents, you're earning your own wage, you have your own car, you're off the way, boom.
Mm-hmm.
There is just this shift. And you're like, where did that come from? Why does that exist? And that is because maybe there's been a little bit of repression and control. So let's talk about, I think it's important to talk about it.
Yeah, I think that's so. It's so important because if you raise your children with all of these yeses and nos, and this is what you should and shouldn't do, you're continually prescribing to your children. And I think it doesn't matter what environment you're raising them in, what educational system you're doing. If the goal is prescribing your children's way of life without actually raising them to be, you know, people with self-governance and good moral humans, without self-governance, like if you're raising them in that way, there's always going to come a time where you're always going to want to break free. And I've always said that I want to raise my children by God's grace to understand the why, because you can only give them so many yeses and nos,
right?
But you cannot possibly prescribe every yes and no and you shouldn't to any situation they're going to encounter. I've personally been raised with very good, solid principles. My parents wanted to raise me as a very upstanding, good Christian girl, woman. But I did feel like it was very prescribed in many ways. I didn't understand many aspects of the why. So then when life happened and then, you know, different situations occurred where it wasn't, you know, the gray area of life, because each person individually is going to encounter their own gray.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
I was like, well, on paper, this is what I should do.
Right.
But then feelings come into it. But this feels good. Or maybe I would like to go there or do this thing. And because I didn't know my why, like fundamentally my why, there's many instances where I feel like I've slipped up in ways that I don't think I needed to have done if the system of raising me was more to do with educating as to why we have these principles, why that's going to save you from X, Y, or Z. And that's why I think it's really important. Like if your kids can ask you a question, don't just be like, no, you can't.
Right.
Why?
Yes.
Like, I don't think that's a good idea because X, Y, Z. They might not understand everything.
Right.
But if you continually repeat the same things over to them, one day it will click. Oh, Mum's always said this.
Yes.
We don't do this because X, Y, Z. And so then when a situation occurs that's kind of parallel or whatever, they're like, oh, it kind of resembles that. And the why is, and I think why is the biggest tool that we can ever give our children.
Yeah.
So that they can govern themselves in all of the diverse situations that they're going to encounter that we can't possibly envisage.
Right. And I just want to build on that because I was reading somewhere, and I thought it was a really interesting principle where a parenting book, I can't remember the name of it, and it was talking about how we need to set ourselves up in such a way. And of course, you know, you're not going to be able to do this in every circumstance. We say yes to our children more than we say no. And what I mean by this is, I think what they meant by it, because I experienced this in my life. Like growing up, my parents gave my brother and myself a lot of freedom. They gave us a lot of freedom to do a lot of things so that when we hit those teen years and on beyond, there was never a desire to rebel, to turn a switch, or because we always had the freedom to pursue the things that we were interested in. My parents said yes a lot more than they said no. And I think, you know, when it came to basic principles, they always explained things to us. You know, this is why or why not, and they lived it. It wasn't one rule for us because we're the kids and another rule for them. And one thing that I do with my kids a lot is I like to be able to say yes more than I say no. So like when it comes to, and our children are exposed to media, to books, to music, to all that, right? And again, I was reading in Child Guidance where it says, and so this is a principle. This is a particular instance, but the principle underlying it. So it says children will read but as parents, we must cultivate their tastes. So the idea is there are things in life that children are going to be exposed to, but you can't stifle that.
Right.
But you can, from a young age, cultivate their taste so that they learn how to choose what's good.
What's good, yeah.
Yeah. So I think sometimes, especially as Christian parents, we feel the weight of creating these perfect little specimens instead of realizing that they don't have to be perfect. They need to be faithful to Jesus.
But is that because we're parenting out of our own trauma?
Yeah.
Parenting out
let's talk
of
about
a place
that.
of fear.
Right. Yes.
And so we may have gone and experienced things in life that we're like, oh, I wish I hadn't have done that. And so out of fear, you're like, well, if I wasn't allowed to go here, or do this,
I would never have done that.
Have done that thing.
Yes.
And so you're kind of trying to heal your own trauma
right.
by prescribing life to your children.
Right.
And I think for me, especially, I know it's something that I really have tried to focus on is not parenting out of my trauma. Because there's a lot
so
there.
Valid.
And
yes.
And they've not experienced those things.
Right.
But they're being scarred by my scars.
Yes.
And so instead of healing through them, it's taking the time to do that for myself. And then raising them to be free. Like I never ran on the grass. I was scared there was things that were going to like burrow into my feet and crawl up to my brain and give me brain. Oh, I don't know where that came from, but that's just what I am. I'm like kids, just run free on the grass. Play in the mud, you know.
Yes.
Do those things that I am too fearful to do that aren't, you know, drastically dangerous within principle, but to raise them to be freer than we are.
Right.
Or were.
I think that reminds me a bit of King David with his children, and he's often considered a bad father in the sense that perhaps his sin had an influence on how his children behave, but also the lack of discipline. So I think discipline plays such a large
part of it. It's a balance, right? Because you need to set boundaries. There are things that, you know, biblical principles are there for a reason, to protect. So you want your children to know the big biblical principles, right? So for example, if you are raising kids and they come to that preteen age or teenage, sexual purity, you want them to know what the Bible teaches because that is for their protection, right? What they put into their mind, what they read, that then plays into whether they stay pure or not. So of course you want to regulate that. As parents, we want to be responsible, but at the same time, there are certain other things that are personality. Yeah. There's a difference between personality and character. Character is, I always tell my girls, character is kindness, self-control, humility. Personality is you love to talk and run around. Your sister likes to be quiet. So give her 30 minutes to just sit in a corner while you go do your thing, because that's not character. That's personality. How you communicate that, okay? So for example, leave me alone. Wow, there's this fight. No, you can communicate that kindly. That's character.
Yeah.
But give her some space. That's personality. And we need to be able to give our kids the space to have their own personalities.
Yeah, to be individuals.
That's right.
Or else it's just always, you know, mini-me's.
Right.
And there's certain times where I'm like, I can't live with myself. Like, I'm not trying to force you to be, a mini-me. Like, no, find out what
you're unfairly accommodating somebody else.
Yeah.
You know, like, oh, my sister wants to play, so I have to be self-sacrificing and play all the time. No, it's okay if you need quiet time. Your sister needs to be self-sacrificing. It's that balance. Yeah.
It makes me like talking about raising kids and disciplining and disciplining versus controlling makes me think of Eli. He had sons that were crazy.
Right.
Yeah.
And Israel paid
such a price.
Really high
yes,
price
that's right.
for his lack of discipline.
That's
for
right.
His boys.
That's right.
And that's in 1 Samuel. And it's very sad. But then you have Samuel. And
he was also raised by Eli. Yeah.
He was raised by Eli, but he had a mother who prayed for him.
Right.
And loved him. Like, even though she gave him to the temple at a very young age, he knew that his parents loved him so much, even though he was separated from them.
Yes.
And I feel like that love and like the parents not being self-seeking, that maybe made the difference.
Yes.
And that I mean, I don't know exactly what Eli's issues were, but he was maybe not, he didn't spend enough time with them.
That's
or
right.
maybe they didn't have that
That's right.
solid relationship with him as a father.
Yes.
And I think, the parents not being self-seeking is kind of
I love that relationship and love. Sometimes as parents, as Christian parents, we're so focused on the discipline, on the externals, that we forget that children are little people who they have a love cup. I was reading this again in some other book, how every child is a love cup and they need that filled.
Just drop into them.
And sometimes that love cup is just a hug, a kiss, just that tactile sense that mom loves me, dad loves me, so that when you do have to discipline, and you do have to discipline, right? Every parent has to discipline their child. They know that you're coming from a place of love.
Yeah.
Not because you're telling them, I love you, but but because they have sensed that love. They've experienced that love.
They trust that you as a parent have their best
interests at heart. Right.
I read somewhere that children spell love Time. And I think the example that you gave, like maybe Eli was so preoccupied with, serving Israel, all of that, what that entailed. But the story of Hannah is like, she's praying over her son. She's making him these coats. She's visiting him. Like her whole year is built around visiting him. And he, I don't doubt, would have grown up knowing he was the focus of her time. And that was a priority for her. So he didn't have to act out. He didn't have to do all those other things. He had that, giving our kids time, I think.
Yes.
And I think even back to the story that we started off with, if Jane's parent had given her time or spent time understanding who she was and what was important to her.
Her best interest.
She just wanted to go home after all the
I
kerfuffle.
know.
Can I just go home?
I know.
Like, time to just stop and pause with her.
Time and like she was a pawn, right?
Yes.
And children sense it when you are like children using them, or when they're in the way.
Yes,
where they're just a nuisance, or or you're just using them to advance yourself. Children know, and so I feel like more is caught than taught, right? That's a principle. More is caught than taught. So children sense who you are and your heart before what you have to say. And so it's who we are fundamentally that matters more than what we say. Yeah. And I mean, if what you say is a byproduct of who you are, then great. But there needs to be congruity between the two. With our time's up, and what I want to do is I want to end with this verse in Ephesians 6. Ephesians 6, 1-4. And I think it's just got great balance here, right? So it says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor thy father and mother, which is the first commandment, with promise that it may be well with thee and that thou mayest live long on the earth. And ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Parenting relationship, the parent-child relationship is a two-way street. If you want your child to respect you, then don't provoke them to wrath. Nurture, right? I think a parent-child relationship is one of the most sacred bonds that God has given us as human beings. And often we don't value it as we should. We toss it aside because it's too hard. It's not prestigious enough. It's not, recognized enough. But it's so valuable, and it takes so much out of us to be able to nurture and develop our children so that there's mutual respect and mutual love. Charlene, would you like to pray for us to close?
Absolutely. Father in heaven, thank you so much for steering us towards this topic of parenting. Such a sad example of Jane and the end that was met because of the path that her parents chose. I ask, Lord, that you'd give us the ability, whether we are parents, whether we are aunties, uncles, grandparents, there's always somebody that we can influence. And I ask, Lord, that you'd give us the grace to see them, who they are, to nurture their personality and character towards you, and that you would help us to not parent or instruct out of a place of our own trauma, but to seek first your kingdom and to try and impart joy into those around us. I pray a blessing on our children, that you would raise them up to be who you've called them to be, and that you bless those of us who are parents, those who are guardians, that you'd help us to take that responsibility seriously, and for it to be our focus, to give them the time that they need, the attention that they need to grow in a way that you would have them grow. This is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Sisters of Light podcast. We hope that you've been blessed. Before you go, I'd like to let you know about a companion devotional book that I've written, which you can get at the Lineage Journey website, www.lineagejourney.com. I'd also like to let you know about companion books in the series, Sisters in Arms and As Bright as the Stars. If you'd like more information about us, you can find more of it on our website. And also, please don't forget to like and subscribe.